My name is Harriet Calloway. I am 31 years old, and the first thing I need to tell you is this. I still have the videos. They live in a folder on my phone, buried under 17 other folders, labeled with a date that looks like nothing special to anyone who doesn't know what happened in that granny flat, in that dark, power-cut hallway, with a loaded gun sitting somewhere in a bag I hadn't even thought to fear, until it was too late to be anything but afraid of it. I'm telling you this story now because I'm far enough away from it to speak about it without shaking. Mostly, I'm telling it because for the 3 days right after it happened, I kept opening my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Not to my mother, not to my best friend, not to the cousin I love more than almost anyone on this earth. Nothing. Just this hollow, revolted silence where words should have been. But let me take you back to the night it started. Not the beginning, because the beginning was years ago when he first shook my hand and smiled like someone's good-natured uncle. But to the night I first felt the wrongness of it. The night the sticker landed on my thigh, and I told myself it was an accident. We were sitting on the floor of the granny flat attached to my parents' property. The cards were spread across the carpet. My little sister cross-legged beside me. My cousin Mira laughing at something she'd drawn from the deck. The overhead light was warm and yellow, the kind of light that makes everything look safer than it is. His name was Keegan, 27 years old, my cousin's fiancé. A man who had known me, in his own words, since I was just a little kid. He'd been good all evening, up until the exact moment he wasn't. The sticker landed on my thigh, just above my knee. I looked at it. A small blue star, the kind of sticker you'd find in a children's craft kit, which is exactly what they were, because someone had found a whole pack in one of the cupboards, and we'd all turned into idiots about it, laughing, sticking them on each other's faces and arms, which is what you do when you're bored and it's late and you're around family. I told myself it was part of the game. I told myself that for about 4 more stickers. And then the 5th one went to the inside of my thigh, and I understood, with the slow, awful clarity of someone watching a car accident begin, that nothing about this was a game. By then, Mira had already gone to bed. She'd had a little too much to drink. Nothing bad, just tired happy, the way she gets. And she'd kissed us all goodnight, and disappeared through the back door of the main house. My little sister was still there. And then, at some point, I couldn't track precisely. She wasn't. And it was just me, and him, and I didn't leave, because I didn't want to make it weird, and I didn't speak, because I didn't know what words existed for what was happening, and I didn't move, because something in my body had gone completely still, the way a small animal goes still, when it understands that running might make something worse. But I did one thing. I remembered to record. That was the only brave thing I did that night. And I want you to understand exactly how scared I was when I did it. Because reaching for my phone without him seeing it, and pressing record without my hands shaking visibly, keeping my face neutral, that cost me every single thing I had. I was 17 years old. 17. And I was sitting on the floor of a darkened room, with a grown man's hand moving up my thigh. I'm going to tell you the whole story. Every part. But first, I need you to understand who I was before this happened. Because that matters. It matters more than anything. I grew up in a loud, beautiful, complicated family. The kind of family where every gathering feels slightly too large and slightly too warm, where the food is always abundant and the opinions are louder, where people show up unannounced and stay for 3 days longer than planned. And somehow, that is fine. That is normal. That is love. My mother's side of the family is enormous. 6 siblings, which means an army of cousins, which means that growing up, there was always someone to fight with, and someone to hide behind, and someone to call at 2 a.m, when everything felt impossible. Mira was one of those people. Mira, my mother's oldest sister's daughter, 4 years older than me, and approximately 1,000% more put together than I ever was. She had this quality about her. I don't know how else to describe it. Like she had already figured out the rules of being a person, and was simply executing them with quiet grace, while the rest of us were still reading the manual. She remembered birthdays without being reminded. She called our grandmother every Sunday without fail, at 11 a.m. exactly, because that was when Grandma had her tea. She made everyone around her feel slightly more organized just by proximity. And she was funny. God, she was funny in this dry, understated way, where she'd say one sentence with zero expression, and you'd suddenly be crying, laughing. She once described her job in a single line that made the whole dinner table lose it. And I've kept that line in my head for years, because it was so perfectly hers. She fell for Keegan 2 years before any of this happened. I met him for the first time at a family lunch. He was tall, easy in the way some men are easy, comfortable taking up space, comfortable making eye contact, comfortable making small talk with strangers. And Mira looked at him with this light in her face I had never seen before, and that was enough for me. If she liked him, he was fine. That was my whole analysis, and I was 15 at the time, and had approximately zero interest in my cousin's romantic life, beyond confirming that the person she'd chosen wasn't visibly terrible. He wasn't visibly terrible. He shook my hand and called me the famous Layla, because Mira had apparently talked about me, and I was briefly charmed, and then immediately went back to my phone because I was 15 and had better things to do. Over the next 2 years, I saw him at maybe 4 or 5 family occasions. He was always the same, cheerful, a little loud, the kind of person who fills the room without meaning to. He was good to Mira. He held her coat. He laughed at her jokes. He called her family by name and remembered details about them from previous conversations, which is the kind of thing that makes people love you. My family liked him. My parents thought he was decent. My little sister thought he was funny. I had no strong feelings either way. He was just Keegan. Mira's Keegan. Someone else's person. And then they got engaged, and I sent Mira a voice note that lasted 6 minutes and 42 seconds, and consisted almost entirely of me screaming. That's who we were. That's what we had. I want you to hold that. Hold it carefully, because I'm about to tell you what happened to it. They came to visit for a weekend. My parents had some furniture that belonged to a relative, a table, some boxes of kitchen things. And Mira and Keegan offered to collect it on a drive they were already making, because they were like that, the kind of people who made the errand easier for everyone. And they arrived on a Friday afternoon with a borrowed trailer and enough energy for a party. The first evening was entirely fine. We went to a bar. Me, Mira, Keegan, and my dad. which sounds odd, but my dad is one of those people who likes to know the people in his daughter's life, and Mira's fiancé absolutely counted. We got a table near the back. Keegan taught me to play pool. He was patient about it, adjusting my grip, explaining angles, all of that. Nothing about it felt wrong. He stood close sometimes when showing me where to aim, but the bar was reasonably busy, and you do stand close when you're teaching someone something physical. I thought nothing of it. Actually, I enjoyed myself, and we came home at 11, and I went to bed thinking that the visit was going well, and that Mira was lucky, and that I'd probably try to play pool again sometime. The second day. That's where I need to slow down and tell you carefully, because even now, I am aware that the things that happened could be described in a way that sounds minor. That's the problem with this kind of thing. It doesn't look like anything from the outside. It looks like a man sitting close. It looks like a knee being touched. It looks like a sticker placed on a thigh. It only becomes what it is when you're on the inside of it. When you feel the intentionality. When you understand that every casual-looking gesture has been calculated. We started with cards. The four of us, me, Mira, my little sister, Keegan, spread out across the floor of the granny flat, and which is what my family calls the small, self-contained room attached to the main building. Mira and Keegan had been sleeping in there. It had its own bathroom, a little kitchen area, enough space for guests. Mira started losing at cards immediately and became very dramatic about it, which is one of my favorite things about her, this refusal to be a gracious loser. My little sister, who is 11, found the sticker pack in the little wooden chest by the window, and within 30 seconds, the cards were forgotten. We were all sticking stickers on each other, arms, faces, hands. My sister got one on her forehead and wore it with complete sincerity for 20 minutes. Mira stuck 3 on Keegan's shoulder in a little row and said something that made everyone laugh. I remember it as warmth, and I remember it as exactly the kind of evening that makes you feel like your family is something to be grateful for. And then, sometime around the point where Mira was getting sleepy, she'd had 2 glasses of wine. Not much, just enough to make her eyes heavy. Keegan placed a sticker on my leg, just above my knee, a small blue star. I looked at it. I thought, fine, we're all doing the sticker thing. This is the sticker thing. Then another one, a little higher, then another one. Mira said something about being tired. She got up, unsteady on her feet, smiling at nothing in particular the way tipsy people smile, and she went to the back door and through it, and she was gone. My sister, who had the attention span of someone her age, had already drifted off to look at something else. I don't even remember what. I just remember that at some point, I registered she wasn't in the room anymore, and he put his legs under mine. More comfortable, he said. Something about sitting cross-legged hurting his hips, and I had my knees bent, and his legs slid underneath them, and I thought nothing of it for approximately 30 seconds. And then I felt it. The slow, deliberate rubbing of his leg against mine. Not accidental. Not the kind of contact that happens when 2 people share a small space. Intentional. Patient. I remember my body going very still. I remember thinking, in this weirdly rational voice inside my head, don't overreact. You might be misreading this. People touch their cousin's fiancé's legs all the time. This is normal. This is probably nothing. And then his hand went to my knee, and I knew, Max, I want to stop here, and tell you what it feels like to know something terrible and not be able to move. I've been trying to find the right words for this for months. I've talked to people about it. I've tried to write it down 3 times in my journal and deleted it each time. What I keep coming back to is this. It is not paralysis exactly. It's more like your body makes a very fast calculation that you don't consciously authorize, and it decides that stillness is the safest available option. And so, you are still. You are completely still, and your brain is running at approximately 900 miles an hour behind your completely still face. He rubbed his hand along my knee, just back and forth. Easy, casual, as if he'd done it 1,000 times and had every right. My phone was in my pocket, and I reached for it slowly, the way you move when you don't want anyone to notice you're moving. I opened the camera. I pressed record. I set it face down on my thigh, angled toward nothing useful, and then I thought, I need to be smarter than this. I need to get this on camera. I shifted, said something about needing to check a message, picked up my phone and pretended to scroll, left the camera recording. He moved to my thigh. Higher now. I said nothing. I was sick. I want you to understand that word the way I mean it. Not just uncomfortable. Not just upset. Physically sick. My stomach had turned over completely, and I could feel my dinner somewhere in the back of my throat, and I was sitting on the floor of the granny flat, smiling at my phone, with my hands completely steady, because I had made a decision that evidence mattered more than my comfort, and that getting up and leaving would delete the evidence. And then, he asked me to help him with the front door. The front door of the granny flat had a gimmicky lock, the kind of lock that needs a specific jiggling technique, and Keegan didn't know the technique and the power had gone out, so it was fully dark. He needed to lock it before bed. He asked if I could help. I said yes, because the alternative was explaining why I was saying no, and I didn't have those words yet. I want to be very precise about what happened in that hallway. He followed me to the door, and I showed him the technique. Pull, and then turn, slightly to the right. Hold for a beat. It worked. The lock clicked, and I started to turn around, and he was right there, closer than he should have been, and I felt his hand on my waist, just resting there, a hand on my waist in the dark. I stood very still, and then, and I am certain of this, I will be certain of it for the rest of my life, I felt him lean forward. I felt the warmth of his face near my neck. I felt something that I can only describe as him inhaling. He sniffed me, standing in a dark hallway, 4 feet from where my cousin was sleeping. This man who had shaken my hand when I was 15 years old and called me the famous Layla, stood in the dark and sniffed me like I was something he had decided he wanted. I stepped away. I said something. I don't remember what. I had something light and nothing. Something that created distance without confrontation. And I went back to the main house, and I sat on the edge of my bed with my phone in my hands, and I looked at the footage I had, and I understood exactly what I was holding. But I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to really hear it. I didn't tell anyone that night, because he had a gun. Not a secret gun. He'd mentioned it earlier in the weekend. Something about needing it for the farm property they were looking after. A real gun, functional and loaded, sitting in a bag somewhere in that granny flat. And Mira was 12 hours of driving away from home, and he was her only ride. And I didn't know what this person would do. Before I tell you what happened next, if you want to hear the rest of this, like and subscribe. It only takes a second, and it means everything to me. Drop a comment with your location and your local time right now. I read every single one. Now let me take you back to that morning when I sat in my bedroom and watched the clock and waited for them to leave. They were supposed to leave at 10 a.m. By 9:15, I was already awake, already dressed, already seated at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. I wasn't drinking, watching the door to the back garden. My mother was moving around the kitchen behind me. She asked me something. Whether I wanted eggs, I think. I said no. She gave me a look, but didn't push. I had been awake since 3. The videos were on my phone. I had watched them twice in the dark. Not all the way through. Just enough to confirm that what I thought I'd captured was actually there. That the camera had caught what I needed it to catch. It had. Not everything, but enough. Enough for someone to see what he was doing. I heard them moving in the granny flat. The scrape of bags. Mira's voice saying something I couldn't make out. His voice in response. I kept very still. He came through the back door first to say goodbye to my parents. He was exactly the same as he always was. Relaxed. Warm. He made a joke that made my father laugh. He shook my father's hand. He hugged my mother. He looked at me and said, "Layla, it was good to see you." And I looked right back at him and said, "You too." Because what do you say? What words exist for that moment? Mira came through and hugged me tight and whispered something about us coming to visit her soon. And I held on to her for 1 second longer than usual. And she didn't notice, because why would she notice? And then they were gone. I listened to the car start. I listened to the sound of it going down the driveway. Tires on gravel, getting quieter and quieter. And then I opened my mouth and told my mother everything. Not all at once. It came out in pieces, the way things do when you've been holding them too long. And she stood very still at the kitchen counter listening. And when I got to the part about the hallway, she put down whatever she was holding and turned around and looked at me with this expression I don't have words for. Something between devastation and fury. Something that I had never seen on her face before. She said one thing. She said, "Where's your phone?" I gave it to her. She watched the videos, saying that was the afternoon that changed everything. The day that followed is the one I replay most often in the bad hours. My mother showed my father. I knew this would happen. I had prepared for this. I had asked her to wait until they were safely home. 12 hours. Just give them 12 hours. Because of the gun. Because I didn't know what Keegan would do with a confrontation in the middle of a 12-hour drive. Because Mira was in that car. My father's face when he watched the videos. I was sitting at the kitchen table. I could see him from where I sat. Him and my mother side by side on the couch, her phone between them. And I watched his face go through about 15 different things in the space of 2 minutes, none of which I'm going to try to describe, because some things are private. And in what happened in my father's face watching evidence of a man touching his daughter is one of those things. He didn't say anything for a long time. When he did speak, he said very quietly, "She needs to know." Not Keegan. Mira. He understood immediately, without me saying a word, that the priority was my cousin. And they were right. And I agreed. And we waited. 12 hours is a very long time when you're waiting with something like that inside you. I sat in my room with the door closed. I texted Mira normal things. A meme she would like. something I'd seen on my phone. I watched her respond with a laughing emoji and a heart, and thought about how she was sitting in a car right now, not knowing. I cried twice. The second time, I didn't know why I was crying exactly. Relief, maybe, that they were gone, or just the release of holding all of that stillness for so long. My little sister knocked on my door once. She asked if I was okay. I said yes. She looked at me for a moment, like she knew that was a lie, and then went away anyway, because she is 11, and sometimes 11-year-olds are wiser than we give them credit for. That night, I tried to sleep and couldn't. I lay in the dark and counted things, ceiling tiles, breaths, hours until morning, and somewhere around 2:30 a.m., I gave up and picked up my phone and drafted the message I was going to send Mira. I rewrote it 16 times. Here is what rock bottom looked like. It was 4 a.m. on the second night. My parents were asleep. The house was completely quiet, and I was sitting on the floor of my bedroom. I had moved from my bed to the floor at some point. I don't know exactly when. With my back against the wall, and my phone face down beside me. I wasn't thinking anything in particular. That was the strange part. I had expected when it got bad to be thinking, replaying, analyzing, screaming internally. But instead, I was just sitting there on the carpet in the dark, not quite asleep and not quite anything, in this suspended static state that isn't grief exactly, but lives near it. Somewhere in the house, a tap dripped. I counted the seconds between each drip. I thought about Mira's face when she's asleep. I had seen it at sleepovers over the years. Peaceful, completely relaxed, one hand usually near her cheek, and I thought about her waking up tomorrow, next to a man who had done what I had on my phone. I thought about the ring on her finger that I had screamed about for 6 minutes and 42 seconds on a voice note. I thought about the sticker, the little blue star, sitting in a craft kit in the granny flat, completely innocent, the wrongness of it, the complete and absolute wrongness of one moment preceding another moment, me laughing, cards on the floor, a child's sticker on my knee, and then the next moment, which should not have been able to exist. I want to give you this paragraph, and nothing else for a moment. I want you to sit in it with me. The carpet was gray. The house was completely quiet. The tap dripped 3 times and then stopped. I had been 17 for 9 months and counting. Outside, the night was deep and windless, and the kind of dark that makes everything feel like it could dissolve. I sat on the floor. I held very still. I waited for morning. There it is. That was the bottom of it. If you have ever sat on the floor of your room at 4 a.m. because someone you trusted, or someone you thought you were supposed to be able to trust, violated something in you that should have been safe from them, tell me in the comments. How did you handle it? What did you do on the nights when the silence was too loud? I want to know. And if you're still here with me, hit that like button, because the next part is where everything begins to shift. What I felt for the first week was not one clean emotion. It was 7 emotions happening simultaneously, is all of them contradicting each other. I was angry, actually angry, the kind that sits hot in your chest and makes everything feel slightly overlit. I was angry at him for being exactly what he turned out to be, and I was angrier at myself for being surprised by it, which is an unfair thing to be angry at yourself about, and I knew that even then. but anger doesn't have to be fair to be real. I was sad, not for myself, or not only for myself, for Mira, for the version of Mira who had been happy, for every Sunday phone call she made to our grandmother, in which she had probably mentioned his name warmly, for the dress she had been looking at. I knew she'd been looking at dresses because she'd sent me 3 photos, and for what would become of all of that. I was confused, which sounds like a small thing but was actually the most exhausting. Because he had been for 2 years, simply Keegan. Nice Keegan. Good to Mira Keegan, the man who remembered names and held coats and made my dad laugh. And I kept trying to reconcile that person with the person in the hallway, and the reconciliation kept failing, which meant I had to sit with 2 completely contradictory true things at the same time. There were moments, brief, awful, when I questioned my own footage. Not seriously. I want to be clear. I was not, at any point, confused about what had happened. I had the videos. I had watched them. But there's a specific cruelty in the way the mind works, the way it keeps trying to find an interpretation that would make everything survivable, and sometimes that manifested as, maybe I'm remembering wrong. Maybe the camera angle makes it look worse than it was. Maybe there's an explanation, and the explanation hunting was the worst part, because it was my brain trying to protect me, and it was doing it by offering me a reality that wasn't real. I nearly texted him twice. Both times I had my phone in my hand and a draft open, and both times I deleted it without sending, because I knew with complete certainty that I would hate myself for it, and nothing good would come of it. What stopped me the first time was thinking about my mother's face when she watched the videos. What stopped me the second time was simpler. I thought, he knows what he did. He is not confused. He does not need me to give him an opportunity to tell me he's confused. I put my phone in the drawer beside my bed and went to sleep. That small act, phone in the drawer, not in my hand, was the first thing I did that felt like choosing something. The shift came 11 days after they left. It came from an unexpected place, which is where shifts usually come from. It didn't come from some great resolution, or from Mira calling me back with news. It came from my little sister. She's 11. She has no idea how to be tactful. She came into my room on a Tuesday afternoon while I was doing homework, and sat on the end of my bed and looked at me for a minute, and then said very matter-of-factly, "You seem like you're carrying something really heavy." I looked at her. She said, "You don't have to tell me. I just wanted to say I noticed." And then she went back to her room. I sat with that for a long time. There is something about being seen by someone who has no agenda, someone who doesn't need anything from you, who isn't going to fix anything, and who is just 11 years old and has simply noticed. That reaches somewhere different, somewhere the adult conversations hadn't reached. I thought about what I was carrying and why I was still carrying it alone, even though I had told my parents, even though I had handed over the evidence, even though I had done everything right. And I understood, for the first time, that the weight I was still holding wasn't really about him. It was about Mira. It was the anticipation of the conversation I was about to have with her, the way that conversation would change her life, the knowledge that I was about to be the person who brought her the news that undid everything. That was what I had been dreading, not the past. The next thing. And sitting there in my room after my little sister said the truest thing she's ever said to me, I made a decision, and I stopped dreading the conversation. I decided it wasn't something to get through. It was something to give. I called Mira on the 12th day. My mother had already spoken to Mira's mother, my aunt, because adults in our family handle things in layers, and they wanted Mira to be at home with family before she heard anything. By the time I called her, she was at her brother's house, which is what I had waited for, which is exactly what I'd planned. She picked up on the second ring. She sounded like herself, bright, warm, a little tired from the week. She made a joke about the drive having been too long. I laughed at the right moment, and then I said, "Mira, I have to tell you something, and I need you to hear me, okay? I need you to hear all of it before you say anything." She went quiet, and I told her, all of it, in order, slowly. The first evening, which was fine. The second evening, the cards, the stickers, my sister leaving, Keegan's legs under mine, his hand on my knee, his hand on my thigh, the hallway, the dark, his hand on my waist, what I felt him do that I will not call anything other than exactly what it was. I told her about the gun and why I had waited. I told her I had videos. She didn't speak for a while after I finished. I could hear her breathing. I counted her breaths the way I had counted ceiling tiles and drips and hours in the dark. Then she said, very quietly, "Send me the videos." I did. I'm going to tell you what Mira did, because it is important, and it is hers, and she gave me permission to share it. She watched the videos twice, as she called her brothers into the room. She showed them. Then she asked Keegan to come over. He came over thinking it was a normal evening. She met him at the door and said, "I need you to watch something." She played him the videos on her phone. She held the phone very steadily, according to her brother who was standing 3 feet away. When the video ended, she asked him one question. She asked, "Is there anything you want to say to me?" He started to speak. She held up her hand and said, "Do not make me feel crazy. Do not explain this. Just, is there anything you want to say?" He said he was sorry. She gave him back a ring that had cost 4,300 rand. She put it in his palm and folded his fingers over it. She said, "That's not enough, but it's all you're getting from me." He left, and her brothers did not let him leave without an extremely direct conversation, which I'm told took place in the garden and lasted 6 minutes and involved a very specific description of what would happen if he ever came near any member of this family again. 3 days later, Keegan reached out to a mutual friend of theirs, a woman named Portia who I know slightly, trying to get information about whether Mira was planning to involve the police. Portia called Mira immediately. She didn't even wait. She said, "He contacted me. I'm telling you, I want you to have his message." That was the moment I understood that this was already beyond him. He had miscalculated. He thought he was dealing with a girl who was too young and too shy and too non-confrontational to do anything, and he thought the evidence was footage of something that could be explained away. He thought, I believe, that the gun mattered, that its presence somewhere in the periphery of those hours created a kind of gravity that kept things in place. He was wrong about all of it. Mira consulted a lawyer that same week. I gave a full statement. The footage was verified and formally documented. Whether charges are eventually laid is a process that is still ongoing as I tell you this story. I won't say more than that, because legal things need to stay where they live. But I will say this. He knows the footage exists. He knows Mira has a lawyer. He knows that what he did was not buried in the dark of a powerless hallway, but recorded, labeled, and held safely in a system that doesn't forget. If you liked how this ended, Not with a fight, not with a breakdown, but with a 17-year-old girl who was scared and still pressed record. Then subscribe and check the description. I have more stories just like this one waiting for you. Now let me tell you the last thing. Here is what this cost me and what it gave me. It cost me about 3 weeks of good sleep. It cost me a version of family that I liked, the comfortable easiness of Mira's relationship before I knew what I knew. It cost me, briefly, some of my trust in what I thought I understood about people, and the difference between who someone seems to be and who they are. What it gave me is harder to articulate, but I'll try. It gave me the knowledge that I can hold steady when something terrible is happening, that my hands can be completely still when the rest of me is screaming, that I can make a decision under pressure, press record, stay quiet, get the evidence, and execute it without falling apart. It gave me certainty. Not all experiences give you certainty. Most of them leave you in some gray area of maybe and possibly, and it depends. This one left me with no gray area at all, and there is something clarifying about that, even when it's painful. And it gave me Mira, not differently, not in a diminished way because of what happened. More, because I watched her watch those videos, and I watched her make a decision that was devastating and completely correct, and I understood something about her that I hadn't known before, which is that she is even stronger than I thought she was. And she called me 3 days after Keegan left and said, "You were brave, and I need you to know that I know that." And she said it the way she says true things, without extra words, just the fact of it, clean and exact. I think about the sticker sometimes, the little blue star. I think about the moment before it landed on my knee, the cards on the floor, the warm yellow light, my sister in her cross-legged position, with a sticker on her forehead, all of us entirely safe. I think about that room, and I hold it in my mind very carefully, because it was real. That warmth was real. He ruined what came after it, but he didn't reach backward into it and ruin that. That was ours. It stayed. This is what I want to say to you. If you are the kind of person who might one day find yourself frozen, if you are the kind of person who goes very still under pressure, and if you are the kind of person who rationalizes the sticker, and the sticker until the 5th one, and then you finally know. Your stillness is not weakness. Your silence is not acceptance. And if you can find one small, brave thing to do, even something as small as pressing record on a phone you're pretending to scroll, do it. Do it with shaking hands if you have to. Do it terrified, because on the other side of the terrified decision is the evidence. And the evidence is the thing that changes what happens next. My little sister still has no idea what any of this was about. She just knew I was carrying something heavy. I'm going to tell her one day, when she's older. I'm going to tell her that she said the exact right thing at the exact right moment, and that it helped me put something down that I needed to put down. As in, maybe that's the most surprising thing in all of this. Not the villain, not the camera, not the lawyer, or the ring returned, or the mutual friend who chose the right side immediately. The most surprising thing was an 11-year-old sitting on the end of my bed saying, I noticed, the people who see you when you're carrying something, hold on to them. They're rarer than you think.